Hi and welcome to Own Drum. My name is Faryal. Assalamu alaikum, मेरा नाम Faryal है, and I'm in Liverpool, the city that I was born in. My parents migrated to the UK in the 60s, and I'm just sitting on this monument of suitcases, which is an ode to the migrants that have come to the city. Liverpool has the oldest black community in the whole of the UK and the oldest Chinese community in the whole of Europe. It's a city made up of many migrants from around the world. Mainly, a lot of the original Scousers actually come from Ireland as well. But it's a very prominent place in understanding colonization because it was one of the most prominent players in the transatlantic slave trade. One of the justifications for the operation of the slave trade was the hierarchy of racial belonging, where colonizers and European white people were seen as superior to black and people of color that were seen as inferior. And the echoes of this still exist today. The wealth that I see around me in this city that has made me who I am has so many legacies of colonialism, from the buildings to the road names to the monuments. And this shadow side is coming up. It's an important thing that's happening now, where there's wider perspectives being in discussion, where there's a sharing of knowledge and power. For example, there are heritage walks in the city to discuss and have dialogues around the urban heritage related to slavery. And this is a really important thing that's happening in many cities, such as in Bristol and in Bordeaux, in Lisbon, across Europe. The involvement of Liverpool in the slave trade is a very important part of the city and what it is today. Many ships would leave here in the 17th century, and Liverpool was late into the slave trade, and then it soon, by the 18th century, overtook many of the cities in Europe that were operating in the trade, such as Bristol and London. And many of the ships that were leaving here were collecting slaves from West Africa, human lives, and carrying them in appalling conditions for months on end to the Caribbean, where they were then sold and goods were exchanged. And these goods were extracted from these countries in the Caribbean to the UK to create wealth for Britain. We can't deny that this extraction created an underdevelopment in the colonized countries. There wasn't a concern for people, for people's minds, for the welfare of people. And this has huge implications in how these post-colonial societies are operating and in the psyches and intergenerational trauma. When we're looking at the hierarchies of belonging or a race that came out of the justification for such dehumanizing actions such as slavery and some of the actions in colonization, we have to see that the echoes of seeing some people as superior and inferior have been so deeply internalized that for us to practice decolonizing, it will take time, but we have to link to the legacies of the past to understand the context that we are in now. These things are not just coincidences that spring up in the psyche, they have origins. And if we can understand, for example, the echoes of this racial hierarchy, for example, the metaphors used in the media of inundation and engulfment when in regards to migrants and refugees, with water metaphors of floods of migrants and waves of migrants, we are not understanding the connection of the Commonwealth, of colonization to the present. And when we suppress the past and don't see history in an accurate light, things like Brexit can happen, as well as the Windrush scandal, for example, in 2018, where many British citizens that came in the 50s on the Windrush ship from the Caribbean were unlawfully detained and even deported. We need to understand our history so that we can understand our context. And if in the world we live in, we can reposition ourselves to our legacies in order to create new futures, then we can move forward. I believe, and it may be naive and optimistic, that we can do this. But in order to create wider perspectives and share knowledge, we need to be able to see the past. Recently, I was in Pakistan and I saw the colonial legacies of the buildings, for example, in Lahore, which was the capital of British ruled Punjab. You have the railway station, the post office, the government school, and then there's the colonial institutions of Gymkhana, which was the space for the British colonizers to go and have their leisure space. Now it's a place for elites, and there's a lot of social exclusion and elitism, with many elements of internalized depression or suppression of one's own native culture in order to emulate the British still going on well after the colonizers have left. And we need to not forget that a sign outside the Gymkhana once said, "No dogs, no Indians." We need to be able to engage in dialogues, sharing power and knowledge with communities to see the legacies of colonialism in the world that we inhabit, whether in the post-colonial world or whether in Britain, in the European countries that we're living in. And through this engagement, we can reinterpret and reimagine futures to move forward. But first, we need to understand the context that we live in and take things out from under the rug that we have hidden under the rug for so long. I hope that you can join me on Own Drum so that we can look into this really loaded and messy work of decolonization in a slow and compassionate way. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye.